Vijay Prashad joins us now. Thank you, Vijay. Always a pleasure to see you. Let's not just take my word for it. You give us, give the audience your view on the greatness, or otherwise, of Patrice Lumumba.
You see, George, it's great to be back with you. It's just after the 61st death anniversary, assassination anniversary of Patrice Lumumba. He was assassinated very brutally by Western intelligence services working with the military forces that had essentially mutinied against his government. The situation was so gruesome that his body was essentially disappeared. They knew that the myth, the vision of having a Lumumba body, to bury and therefore a place where his supporters could go was too much for them to bear. They destroyed his body. Whatever remains were there were taken back to Belgium, and till today, 61 years later, there's a debate going on about his remains. There was an agreement to bring the tooth and other parts of Lumumba's body back to the Congo on the 17th of January. That fell apart. The president of Congo said, well, it had to do with COVID. Let's delay till June. In fact, there are serious disagreements among various parties about what should be done. The family of Patrice Lumumba, his children, have said his body's return to the Congo must not be used to strengthen the political forces around the president. I mean, we're talking about a man who would have been the leader for a long period of one of the great countries in Africa. He was only allowed to be the prime minister from June 1960 to September 1960, just a matter of a few months. And I want to say a few words about that. When he came to power, led by people like Kwame Nkrumah, whom he looked up to as his mentor, Patrice Lumumba had a very simple agenda for the country. He wanted to take hold of the country, Africanize the bureaucracy. Belgians were absolutely against that. He wanted to unify the country, to get rid of ethnic and tribal divisions, something that continues to plague the Congo till today, and which is what allows the Congo to be so heavily exploited by multinational corporations, the use of ethnicities against each other and so on. He was prevented from doing that. And thirdly, he wanted to create a military that was patriotic, a Congolese military, not a military that would be beholden to Western intelligence services and military forces. And in fact, trying to create a Congolese military, which should be, in fact, the purpose of any government, to create a patriotic defense force. In trying to do that, he found himself in front of a mutiny of some senior officials who we later learned were in the pay of either Belgian intelligence or of the CIA. Everything he tried to do was fairly commonsensical. It wasn't such a radical agenda. It was a common sense agenda to build a country. And he was prevented from doing that. He was brutally murdered 61 years ago. It's very difficult to forget that the killing of Lumumba, the killing of Thomas Sankara and other people have really taken away from the African people the possibilities of constructing a future. I think that's something that should be remembered now, particularly as these documents, as you say, make their way out of the grisly archives into the present, into sunlight, and we're able to see the role that Western intelligence played in this really very barbaric act.
I watched Oliver Stone's latest oeuvre about the killing of Jack Kennedy during the week, a very fine piece of work, a four-parter that it is. Oliver, I suppose you could say, extends the thesis that Kennedy was sympathetic to Congolese independence. He was hostile to Belgian colonialism, that he admired Lumumba, and for that matter, Nkrumah, but that Dulles, the head of the CIA, was acting as basically an agency that was at war with its own president on Congo matters. And as soon as Kennedy was killed, Johnson changed the attitude of the United States completely and backed the coming to power of Suharto, the brute. I'm getting my brutes mixed up, of Mobutu Sese Seko, who became the greatest thief of the 20th century, who looted billions from the people of the Congo. I mean, billions of dollars, backed by the United States throughout. Is that your reading? Do you agree with Oliver?
Well, I know that Oliver's work is very close to the view that Jack Kennedy was killed because, he had sympathetic views not only to Nkrumah and Lumumba, as you say, but also perhaps even to the Cuban Revolution. That's a view that's there. But I think there's something deeper here than merely Dulles versus Kennedy, or later LBJ versus the legacy of Kennedy. And that's the role of US companies and the defense sector. It's important to point out that there were very significant US-based mining companies, American Metals, for instance, knee-deep in the Congo. In fact, the United States sent as its ambassador to Belgium Bill Burden, who plays a role in the overthrow first of Lumumba and then the killing. Bill Burden had stakes, was involved in American Metals. These are people who had ties to the big corporations. Bill Burden's also was with Lockheed Martin. By the way, if you go to Wall Street, there are remnants of the Burden financial empire. He had his own bank and so on. This was the man sent to be ambassador to Belgium. But it's not just Burden's. Shinkolombi, the large uranium mine in Katanga, in Haute-Katanga province, it's from that uranium mine that the uranium was harvested and used in Japan to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the United States government, particularly in CIA documents, you can get this very clearly, was quite absolutely forthright that there was no way they were going to allow an independent Congo to control this source of uranium. It was one thing for apartheid South Africa, essentially white racist South Africa, to have some control over their nuclear program. But it was out of the question to allow Lumumba, a man committed to non-alignment, to control the source of this very high-quality uranium in the Shinkolombi mine. So it's actually not just a story of, say, Kennedy, the liberal, versus Dulles, the repellent cold warrior who overthrew the government of Jacob Arbenz in Guatemala. There, the Dulles family had lots of commercial interests in United Fruit Company. Dulles' secretary was a shareholder in United Fruit Company and so on. It's not just between the liberal and this, deep state security guy. It's also the very enduring defense and commercial ties that the United States had in places like the Congo, where they just would not permit, George, they wouldn't permit any of their interests to be set aside. This is not about human rights or democracy promotion. It's not about anything like that. This was plainly naked self-economic interest and military interest. The military interest comes in when we talk about uranium. The economic interest comes in when we talk about copper, the copper of Katanga, and later, of course, coltan and cobalt and other important minerals with which Congo is awash. When you say something like the Congo is the richest country in Africa, what you're saying is that the Congo has an immense amount of resources, same as Afghanistan, up to perhaps $3 trillion of resources. But the people are poor, and the people are poor because their resources have over decades been stolen and been used to enrich very small numbers of people who are around the governments of the West. And in fact, let's be clear, almost control them. So whether it's Kennedy or it's Dulles, whispering in their ear are people like Bill Burden, and they are the ones who we need to pay close attention to what they're saying and what they're doing.
We can understand the enmity of Belgium, the overthrown, effectively driven out colonial power. We can understand the fear of the empire in Washington, scared that Lumumba would take the Congo out of the Western sphere and into non-alignment, following people like Nkrumah, like Sukarno and others grouped around the Bandung non-aligned conference and so on. We can understand both those powers, but what did Britain have to gain by being involved in the murder of Patrice Lumumba?
Well, it's an enduring question that the people of Britain must ask themselves, why Britain had such a hard time with the decolonization movement. I mean, let's put this into some context. Yes, India, Pakistan, later Bangladesh were able to wrench themselves out of British colonialism. There's a story to be told there as well, George, which is that, there are documents in the British archive which show that the British understood, look, we're going to lose India, that's true, but we better hold on to the military bases in northern Pakistan, and then the British encouraged the partition and so on. There are documents that show that these were debates in consideration and so on. Other parts of the British Empire, even the Labour government was just loath to let it go. Look at the behavior of the British government in Malaya, where during the Malaya insurgency, they used the most horrible violence against the people of Malaya. Then the terrible violence used in Kenya, during the Mau Mau period, now documented by Carolyn Elkins, a Harvard University professor, superb book on the violence used by Britain in Kenya. There was a hangover here. It is also true that Britain, France, and Israel, in a sense, miscalculated in 1956 when they tried to seize the Suez region, making a claim for that land. And the United States came in and said, no, wait a minute. You back off Britain, you back off France, Israel, go back to your borders. It's for us to define how the world is going to be. And actually, Suez is really interesting because it's at Suez that you get the sense of Britain increasingly becoming the subordinate partner to the United States. And in fact, by the time you get to the Congo in 1960-61, it's very clear that British intelligence has become the subordinate partner of the United States. It's not playing a starring role. It's out there supporting the US interests. And really, that's how you have to see British involvement in places like the Congo, places like Southeast Asia, where Britain plays a role alongside the United States in the war against the Vietnamese people. You have to see this in Britain's role, even in Guyana, in the country in South America, where there were a series of attempted coups in the 1950s, two of them successful, one of them with British gunboats in the Caribbean. In each of these cases, George, you begin to see, and this is markedly after Suez, 1956, you begin to see Britain operate essentially, effectively, as the subordinate ally of the United States, a subordinate allyship which continues to this day.
Yep. Absolutely. Vijay Prashad, thank you very much indeed, as always, for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.